Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 108 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. You will once again need your listener passports for this episode, friends. This week, we are once again traversing the Atlantic, making a first-time visit to Amsterdam. Regular listeners to this program have oftentimes heard me reference the International Training School on Core Correctional Skills in lovely Barcelona. Applications are now being accepted for our second cohort, taking place in October of 2022. Well, I met our next guest when I was instructing at the school back in 2021, and she was one of the students taking advantage of the opportunity to grow in her skills. My American listeners may be familiar with a television program entitled Locked Up Abroad. Although in this day and age of streaming services and other options, I imagine this is not strictly germane to my United States audience. National Geographic, Hulu, YouTube are some other options if you want to track down Locked Up Abroad. At any rate, if you have ever watched an episode of that program and wondered what that experience may be like, if not from the perspective of the individual detainee themselves, but perhaps from the lens of a family member or loved one of somebody incarcerated in another country, then stay tuned. Laura van der Zwet is going to tell us all about her work with the Dutch Probation Service, specifically the work of their international office. The mission of that office is to assist and support Dutch citizens serving prison sentences abroad. One of their goals is to lower the risk of recidivism by preparing detainees for their return to the Netherlands while they are still serving their sentence abroad. They also run the International Desk, which organizes, coordinates, and advises on the transfer of sentences within Europe and the Netherlands. Very fascinating work, and certainly work that extends beyond the traditional duties of a probation and parole officer. Please enjoy my conversation with Laura van der Zwet, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Laura. Why don't we start off by, well, first of all, great seeing you again, as we're, I'm sure, going to discuss. You and I had the opportunity to meet in Barcelona recently at the International Training School for Core Correctional Skills. So I didn't want to come off as so formal, not to say hello to you, old friend.
Hello.
Why don't we start off, Laura? Just go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, sort of the pathway you've been on educationally, vocationally, and then what led us to this point. And then we'll do a deeper dive on some of your current projects.
That's okay. My name is Laura Cleofa van der Zwet. Just to do it right in Dutch.
Thank you.
I am a Colombian Dutchie, so I am an adopted child from young, and I am 34 years old. I was raised, and I still live in the west of Holland. That's the most dense population part of our small country. And who am I? I love being among people. I like to think that is in my Colombian DNA. And I am married to a Caribbean Dutch man, hence my last name. And then about my work, I have been working with ex-prisoners and social rehabilitation since I was 17 years old. And I have worked for the Dutch Probation Service for the last 15 years. In order to do my job, I had 2 vocational degrees, a bachelor degree in social work, and finally a master's degree that is focused on forensic social work. And recently I completed a masterclass focused on organizational change management. And I just started a home study about business administration, mainly because I love learning and personal development. And I also love talking about my work or my job, by the way. But I'm a bit nervous because it is English today, Joe. So I will give it my best.
I appreciate it. I truly appreciate it. And like you, I have a long life of learning. I think that's a great trait for professionals to always remember, that we're always on a constant learning journey. So as you noted, you currently work for the international office, which first of all sounds so cool, the international office of the Dutch Probation. So this essentially means you're working with Dutch detainees that are imprisoned across other borders. So maybe, Laura, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that? Because I'm not sure most of my traditional probation, parole, corrections workers have, again, that sort of international experience. So what does a typical day look like, if there is even such a thing for you, Laura?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to give you a brief overview of the work. The job I do is called regional coordinator. That's a free translation. So maybe you would call it different in English, but I will make it a free translation. And what does a regional coordinator do then? Well, most of the time we work from our office in Utrecht, in the last 2 years from home, of course, because of COVID. But we prepare the return of Dutch citizens who are detained abroad. And to do this, we first make contact with the detainees and someone from his social network that has been left behind. So basically his VIP. And we provide support and advice. And if necessary, we make contact with relevant organizations within and outside social service in the Netherlands to make sure that when they return, they have a better returning. In order to reach our goals, we receive help from more than 300 Dutch volunteers who live all over the world. And we also actively cooperate with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with the embassies in the many different countries that we work in. The work of the regional coordinator at the Foreign Office is therefore less hands-on in providing assistance to the prisoner. It's more about coordinating. So a typical day, therefore, consists of lots of emailing and calling and consulting, reading and answering reports and maintaining contact with all kinds of parties involved, all with the aim of making the return of the detainee smoother and thereby reducing the risk of recidivism. And that is why we also are a part of the Dutch Probation Service, because they also obviously have the same aim. From time to time, we travel to countries that we work in, so we, the regional coordinators. And that's why I met you in Spain, Joe. Mm-hmm. So normally at these trips, we bring together our volunteers from that country. We do a meeting and consultation with the embassy. And most of the time, we will visit a prison as well. So that's a moment in where we speak directly with the detainee.
So let me ask, and you mentioned our experience recently in Spain, and to your point, Laura, there were a lot of volunteers in that training, which my sort of initial knee-jerk reaction was, holy cow, we have volunteers in the United States too, but we don't send them to international training schools. But is that, again, more reflective of the work you do, that you really are, you are also sort of making a connection there with those volunteers and doing some other corresponding work as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there's really no other probation service in the world which has a sort of similar international office. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, there are only a few other countries that also deal with their fellow citizens in foreign prisons. For example, in England, they do something for them. And also they focus on the point of returning to England. But there's no other agency that does this the way we do it. with such a large group of dedicated volunteers.
So again, I want to come back because I'm just really impressed by the way that you leverage volunteers around the world. I believe you've got something in excess of 300 worldwide volunteers. So maybe let me reframe that previous question as, what does it look like for a volunteer working in let's say in Spain, but that's, again, working as part of your network? What do their roles look like? Visiting the prison, stuff like that, or?
Yeah. Well, so they live there. Most of the time they went to the country, for example, Spain, years ago. And then at a certain point, they feel like doing something like a voluntary job. And most of them, they like to do something for Holland because they have the roots there. So most of them, they know the state of affairs in Holland. They still are connected with family or read the journals or things like that. Mm-hmm. And they also speak our language. And then we link them to a prison nearby their home. And such a volunteer will visit one or more detainees every 4 to 6 weeks. And our volunteers, first of all, provide support of the detainees. So it is very difficult to be imprisoned abroad. Being Dutch, you cannot speak your own language. I think it might be a little bit different for Americans abroad in prison because in many places in the world, people do speak English. Right. But of course, this is not the same thing for Dutch. And so our detainees, they will not be able to speak in their own language. And in addition to that, a detainee abroad is very far from family and friends. And there are often long periods of uncertainty about the continuation of the criminal process. In some countries, pre-trial detention can last up to 4 years.
Wow.
Well, that's a long time. Yeah, we don't know this in the Netherlands. The aim here is to complete a criminal proceeding as quickly as possible. So in this way, our detainees and their VIPs often feel unjustly treated during the period of waiting. And we, regional coordinators and also our volunteers, will explain where this comes from. And we will also, very importantly, show understanding, because years of uncertainty is indeed psychologically very heavy. So these visits of our volunteers are therefore also a bright spot in a difficult time for our detainees. And then the volunteers also discuss how the detainee is doing. So the volunteer will share this information with us after the visit by reporting to us. And if necessary, there will be also a possibility to report some information directly to the embassy. And in this way, the Dutch embassy can take action if necessary. So, for example, when a detainee does not receive the medical care he needs, our embassy will make contact with the prison and ask about the state of affairs. And we can also take action from the Foreign Office based on the information that we get from our volunteers in the visit report. So, for example, we could request an overview from debts of an institution, because there is no information about the debts that they have, and there need to be some action to make sure that it will not be higher debts, and it will take a long time before somebody will return home. So you want to connect with the institutions that need their money and, well, let them know that this person is not inside of the country. So we will do things like that. Or we will contact the contact person or the VIP by telephone and encourage them to take the action instead of us.
Right.
We can also get information from the detainee via the same route. So, for example, when he is about to get released and we want to know from him exactly what help he needs when he is back in the Netherlands, we can ask our volunteer to discuss the topics and possibly give specific information to the detainee that we want him to know.
The more you speak, Laura, the more I think of a an American television show we have here called Locked Up Abroad. Are you familiar with that program at all?
Yes.
Okay. So again, as you speak, I have shades of Locked Up Abroad reruns in my head. And I'm thinking, boy, a lot of those individuals would have really benefited from the services of Laura's international office and some of those great volunteers she has working for her. Yeah. So I'm a big data guy. What does the data reflect as far as, so you've got Dutch individuals incarcerated overseas, when they return to the Netherlands, what does that reoffense rate look like?
Well, the international office does this work for already more than 40 years. So it's a long time. Mm-hmm. But till recently, we didn't have lots of studies published. And then when we started with our first published study on recidivism rates of our specific group, we had some ideas of what it would bring, but we didn't know for sure. So we expected that the recidivism rates would be higher than the rates that we know in Holland. But it turned out not to be the case. We investigated more than 600 ex-prisoners known from the Foreign Office. And after 2 years, 23% appeared to have come into contact with the judicial system again, and 29% after 3 years. This is a percentage that is lower than the 43% recidivism rate after 2 to 4 years after release of the detainees who were held in prison in the Netherlands. And it is important to say that the groups are not completely identical. On average, the Dutch detainees who are detained abroad are 41 years old, while the detainees in the Netherlands are, in average, in their early 20s.
Okay.
And detainees abroad are also detained for a much longer period. On average, it's 3 years compared to the average of 3 months in the Netherlands. So what we can say for sure is that there is more research needed to give us more sense of what is happening in this period abroad, and also what is happening after these people return. Why do we see at first lower recidivism rates? That would be a question that I would love to see being answered.
Yeah, that is a great question. Although those statistics are impressive, nonetheless, I want to ask, to what degree do you attribute that to, or do you really get a chance to roll up your sleeves and utilize some of those core correctional skills that, for example, that we taught and learned all about in Barcelona? I know I've got a huge evidence-based practice following in the audience. So do you get a chance to practice any of those core correctional skills with folks?
Well, as mentioned, the regional coordinator has less direct contact with the detainees who are detained abroad. But almost all of us have also been professionals in the probation work in the Netherlands before we started this job. So our Dutch Probation Service has been in existence for almost 200 years, and therefore we have a really strong position in our criminal justice chain. So we work with high professional standards. The evidence-based practices are fully intertwined with this. This knowledge is therefore interwoven in the actions and in the products that we have at the Foreign Office, such as information leaflets. Yeah, although we are a voluntary branch with less contact with the detainees, we bring something very important. Not only do we have these very special volunteers, we also have much contact with the VIPs of the detainees. They play an important role in building a recidivism-free life. But in the Dutch social service, we do not really include these VIPs, at least not as much as we could. And I think it would be good to have them aboard to try to solve the problems of the detainees together. But it is not common to use this in our practice in Holland, but for us, being Foreign Office, it is. And this contact is really special, and it is something to build on, I think, within our complete social service in Holland.
I want to make sure I've got a full understanding because you've mentioned that term VIP a few times now. So maybe elaborate on that. When you say VIP, who are you referring to, or in what context would the American audiences at least understand who you're referring to as the VIP?
Yeah. So the detainee will have to choose a person that is important to him or very important to him when he will sign up for our service. So it could be a mother. Most of the time it is a mother or a wife, but also you have contact with sisters or brothers or very good friends. And typically the detainee will choose for one person, and we will be in contact with this person by phone, by letters, and also we will send some products, for example, information leaflets or magazines that will make it easier for the detainee to talk with his VIP about returning and about the things that are necessary to prepare before he will return.
Okay, now that makes total sense. Thank you for that. That makes a great deal of sense, in fact. Say, we've been talking about the International Training School for Core Correctional Skills. Registration for the second school coming up this October opened 2 days ago. As a graduate of the first school, Laura, would you mind if I put you on the spot and just talk about, maybe for our listeners who are debating attending the school, what your experience was like last year in Barcelona? And again, if somebody's maybe ambivalent about going, we would really appreciate an endorsement, if you will, again, from a graduate. Maybe again, walk through what that week was like for us.
What I really loved about it is the contact with probation workers from all over Europe and some outside of Europe, and the possibility to talk about the way we work and how we can improve that work. And I think coming together with people that you don't know, but with the same goal, make life better for your client and also add to the safety of society. It is just necessary to keep learning, to keep asking yourself, okay, what is normal to me, and how can I improve my own skills? The skill set of a probation worker, that was what the training was all about. It brought us together. We were given lots of information about, core correctional skills from people who know a lot about it. Were able to tell us about their research and, to share with us the newest things that we have in the field worldwide. And then next to that, there was the possibility to train and to try things out, to try to have a conversation that is about less giving advice and more about standing next to your client and listen to what is necessary for him. It gives you the possibility to learn, to get to know other people outside of your own country. And that is the biggest win that you could have if you go to a summer course like this. Next to the fact that you take away lots of information about the field worldwide, because I think typically for professionals, there's so much to do. You have always more work to do than you have time. So we tend to give a bit less space and time for our own learning process. But then at the end of it, you are the person that makes this change, you're not the person that makes the change with your client, but you are the person that brings the energy for the client to make this change. So it's very important that you are on the top of your game as well.
I would echo your sentiments as to my experience. Yes, to your point, we talked a lot about the technical skills, if you will, those core correctional skills. But for me, at least, the bonus learning came from meeting individuals such as yourself, and as you said, other probation and parole officers from all over Europe. For me, at least, I was fascinated. I got to meet a lot of folks from Eastern European nations, which I did not know as much about their cultures. And it was just so fun to sort of do a compare, contrast, or to see how there's just a slightly different wrinkle to, again, the application of these core correctional skills. But in learning those differences, one ups their own skill game because they're getting sort of that diversity of learning. It was almost like an international community of practice, if you will.
Yeah.
So yes, listeners, if you're listening, registration is now open for the second International Training School on Core Correctional Skills. You can join me and Ion Dernescu from the University of Bucharest. And again, our very special keynote speaker this year is Fergus McNeil from the University of Glasgow. So if you want a chance to see a true subject matter expert in Fergus and others, try to clear your calendar to get out to Barcelona this fall.
I mean, who don't want to go to Barcelona?
Oh, I forgot to mention the third benefit was we were in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, arguably. So that's another fringe benefit. You get to spend a week in Barcelona. Yeah, exactly. Hey, Laura, what is on the horizon if we cross paths at some future date? What do you think we'll be discussing?
Well, it's funny you ask. I just decided that I'm going to take a look outside of the probation field. As a consultant starting in August this year, I will focus on change projects in government organizations. And well, being probation worker and therefore an expert in behavioral change, I expect that this would be a fitting next step for me. I am still young and I am ambitious, and I think it would be good for me to develop also outside of the probation service and to see what the world has to offer more. But maybe I will come back someday. It would not be surprising, I think, because I have a big heart for this work, and especially for the life stories of the people who walk on the criminal path. And I have a big network. And, well, yeah, I have lots of information about this work. So I will keep connected to the probation field, but I will stop working in it for all days of the week and go and see what there is more to be done.
Laura, I absolutely admire your infinite mindset. The world is your oyster. I just love your attitude. I think more people, particularly in government, where we tend to get a little too comfortable, should, again, embrace that philosophy of yours of sort of, again, having an infinite mindset and being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and really challenging yourself. Laura Cleofa van der Zwet from the lovely city of Amsterdam, we should add. Thank you for joining us. It was great seeing you again on a personal level. Yes, please keep in touch regardless of who is writing your paychecks. And I hope we cross paths at some point in the future, Laura. Thanks again for being on The Criminologist.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation.
All right. Be well, Laura. Bye-bye.
Bye.
A big Criminologist podcast thank you once again to Laura Cleofa van der Zwet. Thank you, Laura, for reuniting with me and joining me on the program to talk all about the great work of the International Office. If folks are interested in learning more about that function, maybe even along the lines of, hey, maybe in my jurisdiction, we should try to mimic the model that they're doing in the Netherlands that, again, Laura pointed out on this program as far as the services they provide for their citizens who are attainted abroad. Again, it ranges from simple things from basic legal aid to clarifying questions around the uncertainty about a release date. And the big thing, in my opinion, that Laura pointed out, the difficulties with language barriers and really with isolation for people who are detained far from home, have very little contact with their VIPs, as Laura put it, back in their home country. So again, I'll leave that attachment in the program description of this episode if you are interested. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, implementation, program design, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We are also on Twitter. The Criminologist Media Group can be followed at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. Criminologist merchandise is available. Reach out if interested and I'll get some to you. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us. One of their goals is to lower the risk of recidivism.
Recidivism. That's a free translation. So maybe you would call it different in English, but I will make it a free translation. Recidivism Free Life.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.